Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cropper here with Onar, and we're going to be discussing New Intellectuals' concern on this video. This one is Genes, Rucka, and Racism, and Trump. And New Intellectuals says, I believe I'm obliged to speak out when I heard Onar dismissing the fear that people are going back to church and accepting Christian mystic ways. So I just want to click on that. We'll let him say on this video real quick what he says.
I'm not worried at all. No, absolutely not.
He says, I'm not worried about that at all. No, absolutely not. You're not worried about Christians at all. Now, what we're discussing in a larger sense here is Jordan Peterson's sort of bringing up the idea that the nuclear family is a pretty good thing, and we should never have been fooled out of believing the nuclear family was a good thing. And that's a value that the churches, that Christianity at least has essentially right. So we're going to talk about how to understand that they have that correct. And are we going to push back against these churches? And why is it a big concern now? Or what do you say, Onar? Defend yourself against New Intellectual there. Our Pakistani friend, I have to say.
All right. It's good that we have Pakistani friends. I think the comment was made when we were mentioning Jordan Peterson about the rise of his popularity. And the context was that every objectivist should be super interested by the fact that he's filling stadiums with people wanting to listen about him talking about the Bible. Or about ideas very close to Ayn Rand. He talks about taking responsibility and starting with the individual and working from there, right? So the fact that he's mentioning Ayn Rand in every other interview he makes, he's putting Ayn Rand on the map, and he's talking nice things about Ayn Rand. Well, he's rejecting some of what he thinks is his beliefs about Ayn Rand, but he's bringing her into the conversation. And one of my salient points is that he's convincing Christians to take evolution and biology seriously. Like, he's getting them away from creationism. And I just watched a video now with Paul Vanderklay, the pastor in California, and he's rewatching the biblical series lectures that Jordan Peterson made. And he made a comment. He says that there are so many Christians that have come to him, to Paul Vanderklay, like as a pastor, saying they got introduced to Jordan Peterson through those lectures. And they recognize that he's not a Christian, but that he's talking with such respect about things they believe that they got interested in listening to him. So it's sort of like he treated them with respect, and so they treat his views with respect.
Now, can't we be worried that Jordan Peterson's going to bring Gavin McInnes now, who used to be an atheist, has gone to church, and he's going to raise his kids in the church, and they're going to take it seriously. And so 50 years from now, we're going to have kids that were raised in the church take it seriously again. Are you not afraid of that, going back towards that direction?
No, the reason I'm not afraid is, first of all, if we have a choice between a progressive and a Christian, the choice is simple. Like far leftists or Gaiaists or communists on one side, or Gavin McInnes going to church. That's a no-brainer to me. So just taking on the face value, Christians they have a religion that has survived for 2,000 years, and in order to survive invasions, and you have to survive all sorts of crises and to deal with them. You can't do that without absorbing certain virtues. And the longer a religion survives, the more virtues it has to absorb, right? No, otherwise, it wouldn't survive.
To be fair, we could mention, like, the Founding Fathers, most of them identified themselves as Christian. And they also believed in these things like thinking for yourself and being accountable to God, and you can't take anybody else's You can't be second-handed about your relationship with God. And that's sort of a very objectivist way about, you can't ask or consult with anybody. You have to pray to God and speak to him yourself. And so it's a very objectivist sort of idea, a metaphysical with karma floating in the back and magical, and it's all done wrong. But at the end of the day, Christianity does have this sense that it's up to you, and there's nobody else that can help you. You and God are in a conversation or whatever. And Jews have this too, wrestling with God, right? So we do have to give a couple of points to Christianity for this basic background view of the individual as being responsible for himself and for a lot. And he's supposed to bear a cross and sacrifice himself, but still, it's the individual in reality that this religion comes at us with.
What I've learned from following the conversations of Jordan Peterson is that I've not given full credit to Christianity for their aspect of the Enlightenment. There was a lot of Aristotle and Greek philosophy in the Enlightenment, but there was specifically one idea that was not culturally expressed in Athens or in ancient Greece, and it's the notion of universality. Christianity differs from Judaism is that it's meant for all people, right? So anyone can become a Christian because we're all children of God. So it's the idea that the natural rights applies universally to all human beings as creations of God. Now, of course, there's this religious aspect to that, but universal rights comes from Christianity to a large degree, because in Aristotle's time they had slaves, right? And although they had democracy, it was only the men who could vote, right? So they didn't have the concept of universality as they do. And the only reason I think that universality plays such a huge role in modern European thought is Christianity. That's their contribution into the Enlightenment.
Yeah, now Christianity, I just want to note, I'm sure you understand this, but it is from Plato's philosophy. It is a Platonic, maybe you don't agree with me on this, I don't know, we haven't spoke of this, but I say that Christianity is from Plato's philosophy and from the Greek culture generally. So that's the background on which I speak of these things, just to put that out there, that when we speak of Christianity, it is a Greek phenomenon.
It has a huge Greek component, unquestionably. I mean, the Bible is written in Greek, largely, than the New Testament.
I was going to say, the Old Testament is not a Greek phenomenon.
No.
The New Testament is a Greek phenomenon, specifically a Platonic phenomenon.
That's right. It has huge Platonic influences, and you can't deny them when you see them. Like they talk about logos, like in the beginning was the Word. Then that idea is taken straight out of Greek philosophy.
Yeah.
And so I'm not saying that Christianity was completely unique, that it didn't have influences, but it is still a fact that in Greece they did have slaves, right?
Yes.
Even if you had this Platonic influence, it was in fact the slave owners mostly that liked Platonism.
Everybody was into slavery then. What do you mean the slave owners like Platonism? Aristotle said we have to have slaves because the inferior have to give orders to the superior have to give orders to the inferior. There's no other way to organize the world.
Yes. Now, later, after Greece, you had that the people who liked to live segregated from reality happened to be people who could get other people to do the work for them, right? So if you like living in a cozy, comfortable mansion, and you have all those real world people are working out there in the fields for you, then you're more likely to think that the real world is dirty and it's not really as valuable as living in this mansion of wonderful high-level ideals. So Platonism appeals to the slave owner very naturally.
The theory-practice dichotomy appeals to the person who has theories, who likes theories.
Whereas Aristotle appeals to the merchant, the tradesman, who works for a living. He's actually an intellectual, but he works, right?
And he spends less time reading books, so you'll find more intelligentsia obsessed with Plato than with Aristotle. Because if you like Aristotle's stuff, then you're probably out doing somebody's yard or, plumbing or something real. Driving a cab or something, All right.
So, okay, I just wanted to bring that in there that Platonism is the idea behind slavery, basically. It leads down the path of slavery. Yeah. So, but okay, so I'm just giving Christianity its due when it comes to universal rights. Like when America went to civil war over slavery, that was highly inspired by Christianity.
Yeah, and then Christianity also inspired the slave holders, so you only get half a point there.
That's true. It's a valid point. It is. Okay, so why am I not afraid of a revival of Christianity? Well, in part, there are several reasons for why I'm not afraid of it. First, Jordan Peterson has created a revival of Christianity by injecting a lot of science and psychology into it.
Okay, so people have left religion and they're standing over there as quasi-atheists, and Jordan Peterson comes and he says, hey, you can come back to the religion camp because you don't need to drop evolution. Like, you've learned evolution and it makes sense to you, and you think you have to be divorced from religion. So he's bringing back on that count, right?
And yes, and what I'm going to say is it might be controversial, but the Christianity that is emerging right now is almost infinitely more rational and scientifically oriented than the atheism of the left.
Okay, I thought you were gonna say it's more rational and scientific than it used to be.
That's also true.
Yeah, but more than the left is also an interesting point. So take Christianity with evolution brought into it, as Jordan Peterson has done,
and psychology,
and with capitalism, as Prager University is trying to do. Like, look at that as their attempt at Christianity. Maybe we can still be worried about Christianity, but compare that hodgepodge to what's going on the left, and which one is a stable long-term society and which one is going to implode very shortly.
We know that Christianity has been around for 2,000 years, so it has staying power. Communism basically eats its own children within a generation, right? It's just the most destructive force ever to have been invented. You can do more damage with communism than with a nuclear bomb. Just look at what is it?
Detroit.
Chicago. Detroit. Yes, Detroit. Detroit was the richest country, the richest city in the world when Hiroshima was bombed or nuked. And now, 60 years later or so, it's the reverse. Detroit looks like it's been nuked, whereas Hiroshima has been rising to become a huge modern city. That's the power of communism to destroy. So Christianity has also another thing going for it, which is that at the moment, if objectivists play it nice and right and do like Paul Vanderklay has pointed out, which is to show some kind of respect as partners that are just happening to walking on the same road, and we're having respectful conversations while we're walking on the same road, chances are that there's going to be influence there. And objectivism is more likely to make the influence than the other way around.
Now, objectivism, I have to say, you had mentioned this. Objectivism keeps coming up with these people, like from Jordan Peterson to Rand Paul to the old Ron Paul, who's gone now, to Donald Trump. And everybody has to mention Ayn Rand and Atlas Shrugged and objectivism and Dave Rubin and, it's on the scene and it's in the room and it's the elephant in the room. Everybody's got to say their view of Ayn Rand's ideas. Everyone has to give an opinion on Ayn Rand. Everybody's got to have an opinion.
And look at this intellectual dark web, which is sort of the breeding ground for a lot of new ideas. Yaron Brook has been on Dave Rubin's show. Yaron Brook has been on Ben Shapiro's show. Yaron Brook has had Jordan Peterson at Ocon. Yeah. So it's like Yaron Brook is not technically part of the intellectual dark web, if there's such a thing as technically something.
But they are all light players compared to Yaron.
Yeah, he's adjacent to the dark intellectual dark web, right? And although Yaron has some issues with his things he's saying, most of what he says is actually good stuff, right? So we have to give him credit for that.
Yeah.
So he's a very good prophet for objectivism. Based on that, I think that we're going to have you seen the interview with Ben Shapiro and on Daily Wire, the Sunday special on Yaron Brook?
Oh, with Yaron Brook, I'm sure I've seen with Shapiro and Yaron Brook. I don't know, how recent was it?
It was very recent, just a few weeks ago.
If it's a few weeks ago, I've probably seen it. I keep up on most of this stuff, so I've probably seen it.
Yeah. And the thing is, you could tell that Ben Shapiro really liked what he was saying. There were some things when it came to family and all these things that he didn't like, but most of what he heard was he liked. And it was so funny listening to Ben Shapiro in his daily. He has like this show where he talks for an hour, and he kept coming back to it. When he was doing his commercials or whatever, it's like, and it's in. And remember, this product is in your self-interest. And it was so clearly he was inspired by the conversation with Yaron Brook. He's a renewed respect for self-interest.
Yeah. And the thing about it is we spread these ideas and then they go away with this idea and they can't. It was this solid rock they hit in our conversation with an objectivist. And they go away with this solid rock over their shoulder, and they can't get away from it. It's going to be there. It's solid ground that they can use. And I notice people, they pick something up from an objectivist, and then they go around, they swing and hit people with it because they know it's solid. They know they can use it. They throw it out there once in a while, like, oh, what about, we know there's an objective reality or whatever. Go ahead and argue against that.
Was it Boghossian? I think that was his name. In that conversation, they were talking about this. We know this. There's an objective reality and all of this.
Yeah.
There you go. And that was not kosher just a few years ago, right? So you could not hear people talking about of reality, existence as something actual, real, metaphysically real.
Especially not in a flippant way, just sort of saying, of course there's a reality, now let's get talking. They definitely didn't do that.
No.
Yeah.
It was taken, we take these truths as self-evident and so forth. Yeah. So Christianity, generally speaking, it has its bad modes and its good modes. We can go back into the Dark Ages and find some bad Christianity. But Christianity has sort of grown up with science in a relatively okay manner. And the people who embrace Christianity can now talk respectfully to objectivists. Right? We can have a conversation where you're not immediately rejected just because you're an objectivist.
Oh, okay, yeah. in the sense also that a lot of Christians have secularized and gone virtually atheist and are moving back to Christianity. Objectivism is not anathema as it used to be. Yeah.
Now, one of the things I'm playing with is that after having listened to Jordan Peterson when he's talking about the preconceptual nature of man, the part that we evolved before we became conceptual, that's still with us. And that is a very powerful language, the mythological or metaphorical language. We speak in metaphors all the time. And if you think about it, metaphors are actually they're not rational arguments. We use it. You talk about being the bus driver. We're talking about snakes in the garden. That's not an argument. It's a metaphor. Yeah. And if it's not an argument, then you're not speaking to your rational mind. What are you speaking to? And that whenever you use a metaphor, you're speaking to the preconceptual mind, the older part of us. And that's an important part of who we are. And we can integrate that into like a rational argument. We can use metaphors to explain logical arguments to make things more understandable.
Well, a metaphor is noticing a similarity between two things. Right?
That's an analogy.
Well, okay, a metaphor is saying one thing is like another?
Well, yes, okay. I can do a little deviation on this if you'd like.
All I wanted, let's do it. But then I just wanted to say that a concept is three or more, possibly. Maybe a concept is measurement omission for a broader group, possibly. When you have two things, you can draw an analogy. When you have three or more, you can form a concept. Maybe that's...
I'm not willing to be so mathematical about it. Just draw a line at a specific number.
All right, so forget that or put it off to the side.
Yeah, the thing is that we actually have a part of our consciousness, and I was sort of aware of this because I had some really interesting talks when I was like 20 years old with a Sufi mystic. It turned out he was a Sufi mystic. I didn't know that at the time, but he was a really crazy guy, interesting guy. But he was always talking about mythology and all of these things. So I learned at a very early age to think in mythological terms. I felt I was quite good at it. So I put that sort of into the side, but then it returned when I listened to Jordan Peterson. So because I had spent so much time talking to a Sufi mystic about all of these mythological concepts, when Jordan Peterson brought it up, it just immediately understood what he was talking about, perhaps even better than Jordan Peterson did. In some sense, I actually have an objectivist, rational approach to understanding this. So I can say things that Jordan Peterson has never said. That is actually comes from a conceptual framework, and he has been struggling with these ideas for many years and trying to formulate them. And I was immediately able to click together based on my knowledge of things. So let me give an example of that. Ayn Rand talks about basically two types of consciousness: conception and perception, right? She adds in sensation in there, but we can sort of like skip that part because the perception and conception are the main things. What she didn't really talk about in clear terms, but she does address it in her Romantic Manifesto and the Art of Fiction Writing, is the middle point, which goes about metaphor or mythopoetic language, reasoning, mythopoetic thinking. Reasoning is perhaps not the right term there, but I can illustrate it by it also maps into three different kinds of symbols in language theory. Two of them maps nicely into conception and perception. Perception corresponds to the hieroglyph, the pictogram. Like if you show a an image of a bird, and you say that's a bird, so that's a pictogram. What you see is what you get. That corresponds. It appeals to our perceptual side, right? But then you have the conceptual symbol, which is like it's just some kind of random blob. But you say this represents some other concepts, right? So it's abstract. The symbol doesn't. You can't see from the symbol visually what that symbol represents. You're just telling them this is the name or the symbol representing this abstract idea. So normally we call that symbol. But there's a third kind of symbol, which is a middle ground between perception and conception. And we call them indexical symbols or indexicals. And it comes from the term index finger. So if I'm pointing at something, look over there, there's a bird. I'm now using my finger as some kind of symbol. It's not a pictogram, and like a bird, if I do this to a dog will not understand this. So there's a level of abstraction to this. This pointing finger contains perceptual information about what I am referring to. So it does contain some perceptual information, namely the direction. I can point in different direction, and that's a perceptually encoded information. But I'm actually not, it's not a pictogram, because it's not my finger that I'm representing, but it's what my finger is pointing at. You see? So now I have a mixture of pointing, of abstract versus pictogram. There's some halfway middle in between there.
Do we have another example of that, or is that the only example of that?
No, that is the primary example. Animals, strangely enough, use indexical symbols all the time. And I will give you an example of that from humans. When you hear a baby cry, the baby cries in such a way that it sounds painful to listen to. It sounds like, oh my goodness, the sound is just like the sound of pain. So, but it's not actually pain. It's a sound. But it's sort of like pointing in the direction of pain. It gives you, it contains somehow information that this is painful. But it's pointing toward an abstract idea of pain. But it's not a picture of pain. So it's an indexical symbol, and sometimes he had fear in his voice, right? What do you mean by that? Well, it's like the perceptual information contains some abstract information, but it's perceptual. You can hear the fear in his voice, and animals use this form of things all the time. This is how they communicate. They communicate with indexical. They're not as advanced so that they can point at things, but they're pointing at things with their voice. Let me give you an example of an indexical symbol. Your two teeth, your molars. So what does a dog do when he wants to show that he's dangerous, that he has weapons that can kill you? He shows his teeth. He shows his weapons. That's an indexical symbol. Because he's not saying, I have teeth. I'm saying he's pointing to the more abstract thing that I will kill you now. And he's using something visual that's actually his weapon of destruction to show that he's going to kill you now. But he's not saying, look, it's my teeth. So it's not a pictogram. And it's also not an abstract idea, because he's not just making some kind of curly thing. He's showing pictorially or visually what he is going to use to kill you with, and he's using it for communication.
And can we say the same thing of the growl?
Yes, and we can say the same thing when the hair is raised on the back of a cat. He raises his to make himself look big. He said, "Look, I'm big and strong," right?
Yeah.
And the same is with an elk or a moose with big horns. He's saying, "Look how strong I am because I can carry these heavy antlers."
All right, now how have we gotten off to here? What are we? Because we started out with Christianity. Are we or are we not concerned with Christianity?
Okay, I'm getting back to that. Now I'm going to bring it back into metaphor. So a metaphor is a map. It's a map of meaning. Maps of one of the books of Jordan Peterson called Maps of Meaning. Yeah. So I'm now going to show to you how that's a map, where I'm now going to use not just one index, but an entire map of indexes to point to things. And I'm going to use one metaphor to use it. He lived by the foot of the mountain. Now I'm using your body that you know very well as a map to geographically point to where on the mountain or next to the mountain he's living. And now this is an idiom, you've heard it before, but if I told you he lived on the head of the mountain, you would be able to know where I'm talking about. If I said he lived in the navel of the mountain, you would also know what I'm talking about. You would be able to actually find that place in the mountain based on that metaphor. I'm using your body as a map of meaning. That's a metaphor.
Okay.
So metaphors are maps of meaning, basing in things you know very well perceptually, or not necessarily perceptually, but very often it has a huge perceptual component, and then you're using that to map something that's more abstract.
Well, then you're finding a similarity between the things. You're saying the mountain is similar to my body in the following way. If my body were the mountain, this house would be at the foot, at where my foot is.
But it's more than just similarity. What Jordan Peterson is saying is that we happen to choose things that resonate within us in a way that a mere similarity doesn't. So why is there a snake in the garden?
Because snakes. We lived in the trees, and snakes were our number one fear for hundreds of thousands of years.
So we actually have an innate tendency to be afraid of snakes. The fear of snakes is not random. It's partially encoded in our lizard brain.
Now, I want to recommend Broca's Brain by Carl Sagan, which is have you read that?
No, but I've heard it mentioned in this context many times before. Why are you recommending it?
I've read it. It's so good. It talks about the alligator brain that is we have inside of our brain, virtually identical to a reptile brain, but then we've got this other stuff wrapped on the outside of it. So the things that a reptile does, we have going on inside of us.
Yep.
We just have more machinery on top to take even more care of it and be even more careful about what we do. Broca's, B-R-O-C-A, Broca's Brain by Broca's Dragon.
Okay, I will do that. I'll check that out.
Carl
and I like Dragon. I'll get back to dragons in just 1 second. But I want to say, like, when you're in the mythopoetic realm, when you're talking about things that are structures that evolved over millions of years, when you're tickling your brain in that particular area, you're getting some kind of response that feels like a memory, but it's not a memory. You've actually never experienced it, but it feels like a memory. So when I show you a picture of a snake and I use it in some kind of representation of fear, it's like you're having a memory of fear. But it's not a memory, it's just the lizard brain that has encoded natural selection over a long period of time that you should respond in this particular way when you see this pattern.
It's a genetic memory of fear of some kind.
Yes, and it's not a perceptually based memory. So it's not in violation with the blank slates.
It's a pattern-based memory, or
yes,
what you're
based on encoding directly into your physiology, into your lizard brain.
These indexers, or what did you call them?
Indexicals.
Indexicals. Now, one night I sat bolt up in bed, and I knew that I had a very serious situation on my hands, but I didn't know what it was. And so I held absolutely still until I heard another noise, and then I deduced from that it was a cat on the screen in the living room. So it turned out that my inside cat and some outside cat were growling at each other, and I heard this really low animal growl of anger. And I sat straight up, and in the back of my mind, I said to myself, it's just some noise somewhere in the house. You know it's fine. Don't worry about it. But something in there said, set up and take care of this problem right now.
It was almost like a memory.
Yeah, it was like a dark memory of violence in the jungle that was waking me up, but I've never experienced such a thing. But my brain was telling me that noise takes priority this instant over everything, including sleep.
Right. And my point here is that when Jordan Peterson talks about the language of religion has been naturally selected over thousands of years to tickle the brain in those special places.
Now I have to mention Dan Dennett, who says that religion is a bag of tricks.
But it's much more than a bag of tricks, because this is like a bag of ancestral tricks going millions of years back into the future, back into the past.
Effective tricks.
Not just effective tricks. Tricks that feel salient at a core level.
Okay, so effective and true?
It has, and now this is where it gets into the definition of truth with Jordan Peterson that he has been so hammered for. Now, when he said that, you're familiar with Jordan Peterson's famous conversation with Sam Harris, where he's like, "What is the meaning in truth?" and so forth. And I had some in the back of my mind, because I remembered from my discussions with this Sufi mystic something about truth. And I said he was very much into etymology. So I'm just, before I'm going to say anything about how bad this is, I'm going to look at the etymological root of truth. And boy, was I shocked, and it was very impressive, because I'm sure that Jordan Peterson has actually not done this search, because otherwise he would have mentioned it. He might have read it like 20 years ago and forgotten about it. But true has the same root as tree.
Really? Oh, really? I was trying to wonder what you were going to say. Go ahead.
True and tree. It comes from Germanic. And what does it mean? The original meaning of true, in the meaning of sense related to tree, is a tree lasts a long time. And it's an organic thing that has a relationship with reality and needs to act for a long time in order to survive. And we still have that meaning of relationship that lasts a long time as partial meaning of true. To be true to your wife. Right? And now consider what it means to be true to yourself. What does it mean to be true to your core identity?
And come to think of that, what does it mean for something to be true means that it's enduring?
Yes, existence is enduring. Now, what Jordan Peterson keeps hammering on about, and this is the point he's making over and over, what if something survives for almost an eternity. In some sense, that's the truest thing you can have. So he connects truth with survival across time.
All right, so if we've been handed the tradition of the nuclear family, then that is a truth.
It has worked for 2 million years. There has to be something about that is true.
And if you come up with some truth that makes you want to dismantle the nuclear family, then that's where you're going to disagree with Jordan Peterson on what truth is.
Yes. So he's taking an evolutionary approach. He calls himself pragmatic and a Darwinian in this sense. But what he's really talking about when he's talking about truth is things that endure for a very long time. And so I'm just trying to bring into the conversation that what he's talking about when he's talking about religion goes much deeper than just something fancy. It goes about, we've been telling stories to each other for possibly 50,000 years and possibly much longer than that before we even became linguistic. And this idea of telling a story, that is metaphorical. That lives in metaphorical space. It's not a rational thing to do. If I want to explain something to you, why do I tell a story to you?
Do you know, I noticed that these cultures that are non-rational cultures oftentimes relate some sort of a story in lieu of an explanation.
Yep.
So that's interesting that a rational culture ends up with a different way of relating facts and a drier way. It's a dry way.
But here's the clincher. What Jordan Peterson says is that when we give up that preconceptual way of communicating in favor of that drier way, we're also losing one of its key points, its salience, its feeling of meaning, of importance.
Which is why Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead are possibly more important than The Virtue of Selfishness and Capitalism, the Unknown Ideal and Opar.
Because it's a story. And Ayn Rand never said it, but that is written in a religious language.
Her stories?
Because
Atlas Shrugged it?
Stories are religious. That's what Jordan Peterson points is. Whenever you tell a story, you're in mythopoetic landscape. You're not talking to the rational mind then. You're talking to the elephant, to the preconceptual mind, the one we had before we became conceptual beings. And he's still with us, and he's very useful. And what he's saying is that we shouldn't give up on that. There's something like, just because we have our conceptual mind doesn't mean that it's any less important by keeping that ancient tradition of storytelling and metaphor and mythopoetic space in place. And I will give you a couple of examples of this. Christianity has encoded into it an incredible conceptual understanding of something that we only just recently have begun to understand in psychology. The notion of the unconscious and having unconscious sub-persona that can sort of speak to us and influence by making suggestions to how we behave. So, for instance, if you are very hungry, there's almost like a cartoon version of you that takes over and says, "I'm hungry, food now." Right? It's like a one-dimensional little you inside of you that is trying to make you do things. Now, we understand this now in terms of unconscious influences. But how did the Christians understand this? Now, we're going to talk indexical symbols again. What is the primary indexical representation in mythology of consciousness?
Of consciousness?
Of consciousness, yes.
Are you going to say the snake in the garden or the apple in the tree, the apple of knowledge?
That is a good guess, but it's the eye.
The I is consciousness. No, I think you're right. Yeah, the I in the triangle.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
The I represents consciousness across many cultures as this. Now, look at some of the Christian art representing the devil and angels and demons. In many of these pictures, you can see that there's a person who's looking out straight forward, and behind him, there's the devil who's whispering in his ear. Now, what does that represent? If consciousness is your consciousness, what is the ear?
Your brain. The devil whispering in your ear is your biological urges.
For instance, some sub-personas that are unconscious, and they're bringing into consciousness some idea that doesn't go through your eyes, through your consciousness. It's going through the back door, through your ear.
That doesn't come from the five senses. It comes from somewhere else. From back there.
From below, yes.
All right.
Right? Now, the point is that when the Christian sees this image, he has a religious experience of what that means. And he's living in mythopoetic space, and he feels it's very important to him when he sees that. You can say that it's his brain playing tricks on him, but that image is actually able to convey, I would say scientific information that we are only now beginning to understand in rational scientific terms. But then it's able to do it in one image. Bam! Instead of having like a PhD in psychology, you see that one image and bam, you get it all. And you don't get it in conceptual terms, but with maps of meaning.
Which I'm sure that we could draw some parallel to some of the memes that are going around today. And people like the frog meme, the green frog is been a right hate symbol and a symbol for freedom and all this stuff. And so we have these things going on all around us even today. These sorts of maps of meaning are being built even today. And faster, they're being built faster today than they've ever been before. It used to take generations passing these on through churches to build them up. But
we will see how many of them will survive across the ages. If we see the frog in 2,000 years from now, then we're probably dealing with a really, really good meme that's touching some primal.
Now, are you proposing that Jesus Christ was a really dank meme?
There's something about the story of Christ, the narrative, that's probably struck some kind of chord in the back of people's minds. I don't think we can reduce Christianity only to that, but the construction of the New Testament narrative is obviously very persuasive to those who are getting a religious experience from that. So that language must speak to the primal part of the brain in some way, an ancient, I hesitate to call it memory, but pseudo-memory of ancient times. I just wanted to bring one example, the dragon. And the dragon is a form of pre-conceptual abstraction, because the dragon has a cat in it, cat face, and it has bird wings, and it has the body of a snake. So it's a snake, bird, cat. Okay. What is a snake and a bird and a cat? What do they have in common?
They're all very dangerous and sneaky and fly away, elusive.
Well, they are dangerous predators, right? That's what they have in common. They're predators.
The bird?
So the when we were tiny little creatures 50 million years ago, we were hunted by birds.
Sure. All right.
So we have memories of birds. Well, it's not memories, but it's like the fear of snakes.
Have you
It's
ever
built into.
Have you ever seen a little dog when it sees a bird fly overhead? Have you ever seen how scared little dogs get when they see a bird? They have a very real genetic memory of fear of birds.
So I hesitate to call it memory because it's actually not a memory, but it is definitely something there that is triggering us, and it's like, and it feels like a memory. It's like you're getting a chill. Like, this makes me feel really bad. I don't know why, but it feels like I felt it before. It feels very natural. So when you see a dragon, and you see that it's actually it's an abstraction of a predator. And it's like a predator on steroids, because you have a snake there, you have a bird there, and you have a cat. All very dangerous things. And therefore, it's those who constructed the dragon were able to produce an enormous sensation in people of danger. And therefore, you have dragons all over the world, right?
I've seen an alternate idea that the dragon comes from the big long streak of fire and smoke in the sky when a comet or meteor hits. But that doesn't explain why they put a cat face on it and wings and yeah. It's a better explanation.
Yeah. So I mean, the one explanation doesn't exclude the other one, right?
Right.
But the iconic dragon that looks very scary to people across all cultures, that is an example of an indexical, not just one indexical symbol, but when you put many of them together and they're all pointing to the predator. So this is actually just on the cusp of being a conceptualization of predator. But it's done so in a visual way. So it's an indexical symbol.
Okay, so dragons are a religious symbol. Jesus on the cross, or the story of Jesus, pushes those buttons.
Yes, pushes those buttons. And I don't think it's a bad thing to push those buttons. And in fact, I once I understood the story of the unconscious and the consciousness and these the demons and the angels speaking to us into our unconscious, I realized how powerful the concept of Satan is, and what an enormous metaphor we've just thrown out the window, and we're not able to say things anymore that before they had a word for. So when you see a crowd and they're not conspiring together, but they're all following some kind of instinct or some kind of feeling, and it's leading them to do very evil things, and they're doing it together. It's almost like they're possessed by something, and it's not quite their own idea. It's like it's coming from somewhere unconscious. It is themselves, but it's not really well defined. That unconscious impulse that they have is better explained as Satan. They're influenced by Satan.
It's very easy if you believe in Satan. It's very easy to find, like when you feel jealousy against your friend's new car, you say, "Oh, Satan, don't tempt me to feel jealous," and you tamp down that jealousy and you blame it on Satan, and you say, "Satan was trying to get me to feel jealous, but I'm happy you've got that new car." So it's a way to understand, and of course, if you believe in Satan, you map it onto all kinds of things, of course, wrongly, of course.
Of course.
But it is a way to understand the world. Now, we're just not going to be able to get back to that.
Oh, I think we are. I think that
do we want to? I don't want to. I lived in Utah. I know what it's like to be around these people.
Yeah, but
I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. I don't want to go back.
Yes, I understand. And I'm not talking about going back to the religion, but it's when I've tried this out for a couple of times just to express what is it. What does it mean when you're being influenced by unconscious dark forces in your mind? And I say to them, this is the work of the devil. This is inspired by Satan. And it just feels so good to be able to say that. And I know, like, I'm just using a metaphor, and I'm expressing something that is so difficult to express in rational terms. In, like, I can have a string long, this psychology says this, and you have this unconscious bias, blah, 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 blah. Well, I can condense that to just one indexical symbol, which is Satan.
Satan, yeah. Very often I'm tempted when I see pictures on Facebook of some gay parade with people with dildos all over them and children are there. And I'm tempted to just put the work of Satan down in the comments, but too many people would take me seriously. They would say, yes, it is Satan, It's like, no, this is communism. This is communism. It's not Satan.
Yes. But here's the thing. Just like Jordan Peterson was able to get the Christians to be interested in evolution by talking about the Bible in evolutionary terms, I think it's possible to get Christians to talk about, be interested in psychology and psychological forces at play in the unconscious mind by talking about Satan.
Well, that's an interesting road that I'd be interested to hear how you would go down it, but...
Well, if they hear it, this is a crazy idea, but imagine you hear an objectivist, like a rabid atheist, and he said, this is the work of Satan. Okay. Now, this would catch the attention of Christians. They were like, what's going on here? Why are these atheists calling this the work of Satan?
So this would either be the works of Karl Marx or Immanuel Kant. We would say this is the work of Satan.
Yeah, because Satan is a well-established metaphor that has survived for 2,000 years or longer, and is really well-established and has proven through the test of time that it is a durable symbol of evil.
Yeah, some things become symbols of evil that used to be symbols of good. The left likes to switch these things around. And they like to reverse them. They're constantly reversing these things.
Yep.
As soon as one of them gets stabilized, they switch it to another, and they use euphemism. But there are some things that they can't switch around, like Satan and God, are pretty stable meanings. One means good and one means evil. That's interesting that some... Now, shall we give an example of meanings they've switched? I'll use sanctions. Illegal immigrants. They're
nope.
No one's illegal.
Human is illegal. When you say it like that, I am like, I can't help myself laughing because it's such a laughable thing to say. But then I realize that there are people who actually feel very deep about what a deep thought that is, and it's just so dumb. But okay, it works. Okay, but let me now give an example from the Bible. I'm going to take I'm going to do Jordan Peterson here. I'm going to interpret something from the Bible where things are written in a religious language, but conveys wisdom about the world. And it is actually related to Satan. It's a story of the fall of Lucifer, which is actually not in the Bible, but there is a substitute version of it in the Old Testament. And the story makes sense of the Passion of the Christ, because in mythology you always operate with dualisms, with dualities. So, for instance, Venus is the goddess of love, right? But she has a dark side, and that is Medusa. Medusa is when she has hair snake. That's an indexical. You have hair made of snakes, and she freezes people to stone with her hair. And now, anyone who's met a very, very angry woman can be frozen to stone and can sympathize with that. So the snakes represents danger, and frozen represents what exactly this little mouse 50 million years ago that feels danger and freezes in order not to make a sound and to be discovered. So freezing up is a defense mechanism that you do in response to fear, to danger. And here you have Medusa with her predator hair, and you're freezing to stone. Again, mythology containing actual information. Now, what makes it interesting is that Medusa and Venus are the same person. Venus can switch over and become Medusa. That's really interesting, because what in mythology you do then is that you're saying that you're anchoring opposites to each other, so that you are representing polar opposites through the same person or through the same role.
Well, the yin and yang symbol.
A little bit like that, yes, but in a mythological sense. And in mythology,
well, the yin and yang symbol. The yin and yang symbol is that, though. It's a mythological symbol. It's a.
No, actually, that's more of a philosophical symbol.
Okay, fair enough.
Because it doesn't contain indexical information to the same degree.
Good and bad?
It's more abstract. Yes, but it's like, yes, I understand that it's sort of dividing it into two, and yes, it contains a little bit of perceptual information, but it doesn't play on your emotions. There's no snakes there, and there's no there's no storytelling.
All right, it's philosophical. You're right. It's a philosophical symbol. Okay, I apologize. Go ahead.
No, but it's a good point. So, okay. Now, this is something that I have never heard Jordan Peterson talk about. It's just my own discovery. So this is a world premiere of my discovery. It's the discovery that there's a duality between the passion of the Christ and the fall of Jesus, the fall of Lucifer.
There's a duality between the
just like Venus and Medusa.
Oh, okay. All right, just like that. Unpack it a little bit. There's a duality.
Well, everyone knows the story of Christ, so I don't have to repeat that. But let me rephrase the story of Lucifer with the usage of the Passion of the Christ, okay. And you will immediately see it. Lucifer came upon greatness, took upon relieved himself of a great cross, of a great burden, and he rose to the throne of God and remained there for 3 days until he fell down and was cast into the underworld.
That's in the Bible story? That's what it says?
No, it doesn't say that. But I just rephrased it with the usage of the Passion of the Christ.
Oh, he rose to the. So how does that?
In the story of Lucifer, Lucifer becomes the enlightened one, and he all of a sudden he becomes such filled with enormous self-confidence in his ability that he says, "I don't need God anymore." So he sheds off the cross and so to speak, of God, and rises to the throne and says, "I'm now God." And he's able to do that for a little while. It doesn't say 3 days, but for a little while. But then the reality comes crashing down, and God strikes him down, and he's thrown down into hell. From that moment on, Satan, the adversary of God, becomes known as Satan.
Okay.
Now, that is an inversion, a mythological inversion of the story of the Christ. Because Christ takes on a cross, goes down into the kingdom of death, and rises to sit by the throne of God, which is the exact opposite of the story of Lucifer.
Now, the story of Lucifer is someone who takes upon themselves their own grandioseness And the story of Christ is someone who gives up for others and does not obsess over himself.
Yeah. Now, what is God?
What is
mythologically?
God? Mythologically, what is God?
Yeah.
The creator?
What is pointing towards? What is the indexical?
Up? What do you mean? Oh,
heaven? What is the abstract meaning that it's pointing towards?
That God is pointing towards? Afterlife.
No.
I don't know.
God actually says it when Moses climbs up onto the mountain to talk to God. He says, "What's your name?" What does God say?
Yahweh?
No, he says, "I am who I am."
Oh yeah, that's right. I remember. I am who I am.
Now it's come. I am who I am.
That's just the existence of the universe is a fact.
Now he says, existence exists.
Yeah.
I am who I am.
Yeah.
Existence exists.
Yeah.
That's what he says.
He gives an axiom.
He gives an axiom of existence. So he says that God represents nature. God represents existence. That's why we talk about acts of God when we have a natural disaster. Right?
Right.
So God represents existence, that which stretches infinitely, eternally through time. Now we're back to truth again, right? So this connects up with all of these ideas of evolution. And this is why Jordan Peterson says that things that survive across a long time is metaphorically God. Because existence exists. I am who I am.
Yeah. All right. Well, fair enough. Now, what do we do with that? We allow him to bring religion back? And
No. Let's first interpret now the story of Lucifer.
Okay. The story of Lucifer, of him rising up?
And declaring that I don't need God anymore.
Uh-huh. Right.
What does that mean?
What is God? Yeah, what is God, though? Reality. Declaring you don't need reality anymore.
And who does that?
Immanuel Kant, the arch Satanist. Oh, Kant did it first. Kant said, I don't need reality, I'll just go with the mind. So he is the arch Satanist.
We can say that. But he wasn't so explicit about it because he had another ulterior motive. But the progressive who declares openly that there's no such thing as biology, there's no such thing as reality, everything is a social construct, that's satanic.
That's very nice. I like. Bravo. Very, very well. And the Christians never were that bad. They always believed there's some background reality and you have to pray and you have to go to work and you have to feed your kids and you have to fix the leaking roof. They don't believe there's no reality. They never fall for that.
That's right. So there's some bad stuff in Christianity, but these are things that can be fixed. Notice how the story now, I was just using religious language, right? But I was talking objectivism.
Yeah, I do notice there is a lot of stuff, a lot of advice, for example, that in religion, which runs one-to-one with objectivist advice about honesty and reality will bite you and so on. And they, of course, have religious tales and mythology, and they refer to things like Satan and God and truth that, and we have philosophical language for it. So... yeah, there's less distance between Christianity and objectivism than some objectivists think, I suspect.
Now, I have a clincher here. When you listen to Prager, he says, we need God because without God there can be no morality.
Well, okay, so if God is reality, then he's right. We cannot drop reality. We will become immoral savages if we drop reality. He's right.
If you interpret it like that, So I've just taken the religion of language, the maps of meaning that's right there, written in ancient language.
Now, if we assume that there is not a God, then when Prager says that sentence, if that sentence has any meaning, then it has meaning because it's been mapped onto the language in this ancient way that you're saying. So he is referring to some truth, even though there's not a God. He's saying if we forget God, morality will forget morality.
And here's the interesting part, is that Paul Vanderklay, who has done a lot of listening on Jordan Peterson, he's identified what he calls God number one and God number two. There are two different types of gods in the Bible. One is the one I just talked, existence exists. That is the nature, the impersonal God. But then there's the other God, which is the one you have a personal relationship with, right? So you pray to him and blah, 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 all of these things. Now, Jordan Peterson actually talks about prayer. And he has like a famous clip in his discussion with Sam Harris where he tells him how to pray. And it basically goes something like this. Suppose you've done something very bad and you want to repent, you're penitent. Then you really honestly want to know what you want to do. Then what you can do is you can sit on your bed and you can just sort of ask the universe for what should I do. And he says, you will get an answer. And it's not going to be an answer you were expecting or wanting. Because what you're doing then is you're opening yourself up to something to speak to you that comes from a very deep place. Now, he would say, this is what you're doing is you're opening yourself up to being honest with yourself. And during that process of opening up yourself with honesty, there's a process of creativity and transformation that goes on in your mind that manifests itself in the form of answers to the prayer. Now, he can explain this entirely in psychological terms, but it's not excluding the mystical element of it. So he's not saying it's only just psychological. So he's keeping on board the Christians with that explanation. But the Christians now actually have a psychological explanation for prayer that makes a lot of sense to them.
They don't have to go to the mystical anymore. They can understand how prayer is just them reflecting within themselves and coming up with the best answer that they can.
And who are they asking? Well, maybe they're asking the most ancient parts of their brain. And what is the most ancient part of their brain that has endured for almost an eternity? Well, that's existence in its purest form, which is God.
You would say the brain's endured for almost eternity, and it viewed over time, our brain has existed constantly all the way back for millions of years.
I think the first neuron evolved almost 1 billion years ago, something like that.
And our brains today are a direct, have that line is unbroken. That line of succession's unbroken.
Yeah. Same as you mentioned with the blood flowing through our veins, that goes back like a 1 billion years. That's crazy stuff. So my point is here now, what I've done here is I've just taken objectivism and I've translated it from objective speak over to Christian speak, right? And or vice versa, I've translated Christianity over to objectivism. Like, there are some aspects of Christianity that can be translated back and forth between objectivism and Christianity.
Or more to the point, if somebody practices those particular things in Christianity, they'll get the same results that they get if they practice that point. Like honesty. You're going to get the same results whether you're honest because the Christian idea is you'll clash with God, or the objectivist idea you'll clash with reality, honesty is still going to be a good thing.
Yeah. And Paul Vanderklay has a wonderful term for this, how the Bible was created. He calls it dream sourced, just like crowdsourcing is dream sourced. Because like Jordan Peterson makes a big point that if you read the stories in the Bible, they're almost like an hallucination. It's almost like a dreamlike state, like you're on LSD. There's something unreal about them. So it's like halfway dreaming when you're reading the Bible, like the story of the snake in the garden and all of that. It's like there's something unreal about it, but in a way that speaks to you. And what he says, Paul Vanderklay, is that the Bible was dream source. People dreamt up something, and then it was passed through time through natural selection, and whatever stuck across time were actual. We're not just something that something came up with, but something that actually resonated with a deep part of our brain, which is very ancient. Okay. So that's dream sourcing in combination with natural selection. And here, that's a pastor saying this, right?
Okay, that's more evidence that we're moving Christianity towards a more rational direction. Now, yeah. What if everybody... There was a scandal recently. A pastor said, "Ladies and gentlemen, I have to announce to you, I have to be honest about this, I believe in God." Which came as a shock because most pastors don't believe in God.
Yeah, this reminds me of an ancient episode of Yes, Prime Minister, a British TV series, iconic. Margaret Thatcher loved that story. And he has the Prime Minister has an advisor, and he's talking about a new election of archbishops, and he talks about what was the name of those two factions again? It was like it was the fundamental the modernists and the fundamentalists, And yeah, what's the difference between them? Well, the fundamentalists believe in God. So that's that was actually a good point there. But back then, that was an actual joke. People laughed at that. People don't laugh at that anymore. Like that was supposed to be a joke is now becoming reality in secularized churches around the world, or in around the West.
Yeah.
So I'm sort of playing with the idea of semi-hijacking Christian language for just like as a way of communicating using an ancient technology. It's not even a technology. It's like ancient biology going back millions of years. And it's been working for a long time. It is a very powerful language.
Now, are you tempted by... Do you remember the conversation we had with John about secular churches?
Yeah, I remember that. I was having that a little bit in the back of my mind. And this is not a church. This is actually just language.
Right. Well, secular... the churches would form themselves, perhaps. But what do you want? Secular stories or mythical stories? What...
I wouldn't mind. Like I'm seriously considering this. Like when I want to describe what others dismiss as it's a conspiracy theory. When I want to say that the left are importing immigrants in order to take over the society, I'm not saying that it's a conspiracy. It is an action that goes on from the unconscious. It's like in the story of Cain and Abel. Cain is so envious that he kills his own moral ideal, Abel. The story of Cain and Abel is hatred of the good for being good.
So when we want to tell the Christians why the left is destroying America, we say, well, the same reason why Cain killed Abel.
Yes, or we can just say they're influenced by Satan.
It's satanic.
It's satanic. Yeah, they're possessed by evil demons.
Well, if we use that language, we're not spreading our ideas.
Yes, because then they are very curious. What do you mean by that? Aren't you atheists? Well, I am translating to your language what I mean, but this actually has a secular meaning. A demon is an entity in your unconscious mind, and it's much older than you. It evolved through natural selection to influence you. Like, you have only lived for 1 year, one lifetime. The subconscious sub-personalities that are in your mind, they have lived for millions of generations.
Since lobsters.
And through millions of people, and they have been trained to influence from below so that you don't notice them. They're very good persuaders. They're tempting you to do all sorts of things. Very often they're tempting you to do things that are in your favor, otherwise they wouldn't have survived through natural selection. So when you are hungry, you get hungry. Like, you feel the urge to eat, and it's a very powerful persuasion. So it's not that everything that comes bubbling up from your mind is bad. But sometimes, first of all, let's just acknowledge that you are influenced by things that come bubbling up from your mind and you're not aware of them.
Yeah.
Second, that is that sometimes you get something goes wrong. You get a cancer in your unconscious. Something festering turns bad, sour, evil. Then, when that starts to grow, that pain and suffering that you have translating into hatred, that takes on almost like a life of its own, and it's whispering to you from below to do the things that it desires, very one-dimensional things. It wants to kill, it wants to smash, it wants to destroy. So that voice is this voice that spoke to the Columbine killers when they went to the school shooting, right? And that is the voice that's speaking to the left when they want to destroy capitalism. It's the same thing. There's no difference. It's only that the primitive mind, he goes on a school shooting, right? But the more sophisticated mind, he adopts Kant, wants to transform America into a communist dictatorship, and says that there's no such thing as men and women, and you have to have transgender bathrooms.
But satanic all the same.
It's satanic. It's just a more sophisticated version of Columbine killers. Notice that in the story we know about Lucifer, he's the tempter. And the reason he's the tempter is because he's really triggering things in you that sounds reasonable. So Lucifer, in all stories about Satan, like Needful Things by Stephen King, he's making arguments. He's telling you why, giving you rationalizations that you can use it as excuse to justify why you should do this horrible act. Right? Yeah. So he is giving you the rationalizations, and you have a choice to choose to accept those rationalizations that are given to you, or you can reject them, saying, no, I'm just being rationalistic. So this, once you are in the storytelling world and you have actually personified evil, then you are in the mythological landscape. Because once you can use a person as a map of meaning, you have facial expressions, you have all sorts of things, you can hear him talk. It's so much easier to convey information using that language than if you are using just very clean abstract concepts. And we need the clean abstract concepts, but we mustn't dismiss how important metaphors are. Just like you were mentioning, you want to take over the bus and drive it. Why did you say that? Well, you're trying to communicate a concept. You have your reasons for it, and they're rational. But when you're presenting the idea, you're turning to a metaphor. And some metaphors are much, much more powerful than other metaphors. They've been tested for thousands of years, like the dragon, like the snake in the garden. Oh, and tree, the tree of life or the tree of knowledge, where the tree has some element, well, it represents truth, even in Germanic language, right? So I am really playing with the idea that if I can sort of take that entire tradition of storytelling and metaphors that have been tested to be able to trigger the mind and tickle it in the right places, pushing the right buttons, and using it to convey objectivist ideas, I think that can really have an impact on Christians and on a lot of other people.
Are you tempted to write a novel?
That too, yes.
Well, I mean, in what way would you construct this? Because that's the only thing I could think of when you're saying what you just said. I'm thinking, well, it would be a novel then.
Well, that's one way of doing it. But when I don't have to write a novel to say that the progressives are satanic.
Well, a short story?
No, I can just say it. I can use it in my language as a metaphor. They're satanic.
Well, then you've just given up secular language, and you're just sounding religious.
Well, that it sounds like I'm giving up secular language, but it's actually I view it as I've enhanced my secular language, because today, how can I say that people are influenced by unconscious biases that are diseased and festering like a cancer in their mind and taking over and influencing them below? How can I say that?
I'll meet you at evil, because evil is a very strong word. It's not just bad or destructive or mistaken. Yeah. It's evil.
Yeah. Now, evil is unfortunately, in that sense, it's clean. I mean, it's perfectly possible to have a rational concept of evil. It doesn't have to have any stories associated with it.
You specifically want to use language that's irrational? That's what you're going to be accused of, using irrational language.
But here's the thing. It's not irrational. A metaphor is not irrational. It's pre-rational. It's talking to the pre-rational mind.
But going around and saying that the left is satanic.
Yeah. Now,
that means demons, literal ghosts and demons for some people.
Yeah, and if people ask me about it, and if I get a chance to tell them, I say that we have little critters in our mind. We can call them demons if we like, but they are evolved through natural selection over a long period of time. They are unconscious personalities, sub-personalities that are one-dimensional, and they've been trained through millions of years to influence you through unconscious bias.
If you say the left is satanic, I'm telling you that there were people up and down the street that I grew up on that would take that language in a way more literally. I mean, They would actually think that you mean possessed by demons, and
I understand.
I mean, just as crazy as you think they can be. That's how they are, and they drive cars and they eat at restaurants.
I know, I understand, and the reason they actually are able to do that and survive is because we can actually live quite okay life only surfing on metaphors, right? I just used a metaphor there, surfing on a metaphor.
All right, fair enough, as long as we don't fall off the board.
Again, another metaphor.
All right.
So once you start looking for your metaphors, and again, I'm not actually looking for them, I'm searching in my mind but then you find metaphors actually is everywhere.
Yeah.
It's fact.
Now the people who say everything's metaphor go too far. Let's not let them go too far.
No, it's not far. But, and here's the one, I love this metaphor. You're going to like this. The metaphorical language is the elephant in the room.
All right, good. All right. All right.
That was, you have to admit, that one was good. You're the elephant rider, and there's an elephant in the room, and you can't see it because we're not paying attention.
And it's the major thing. It is the major thing. Yeah.
And notice here that when I think it wasn't Steven Pinker, it was Jonathan Haidt that introduced the metaphor of the elephant, and the elephant rider. And in the beginning, I didn't see the point of that. What is it with this elephant? Why is it such a powerful image that people just immediately get onto?
Oh, did I? I think I might have mentioned it to you in our early talks, and you didn't know what I was getting at, or did?
No. I've been talking about the elephant rider all the time.
Oh, you alerted it to me then. I was talking to somebody else, and they had no idea what I was going on about.
Okay, but the point here is, I actually noticed that when you talked, I think it was to Rucka in your first conversation, then you actually mentioned the elephant rider like that. And the thing is, out of the conversation we had, we talked a lot, and a lot of this is something that you didn't have perfectly well formulated in your mind, but you remember the elephant rider. Why did you do that? Because it was tickling that ancient part of your brain that it picks up on these things. Yeah. That's the power of memes, the power of metaphors and maps of meaning. And I think that when people pick up on the elephant rider, what they're really picking up on is that we already have a well-established meaning of what elephant in the room is. So unconsciously, there's an association that it's like, oh, there's something about that concept there that just sounds so right. I don't understand why, but I sense that this is a good metaphor for some reason. And people start using it, and people start using it, and it spreads.
Well, I liked it because I think, first of all, we spend approximately half of our time zoned out or sleeping. So you've got less than half of your life. You're right there. You're riding an elephant because less than half of your life is awake, or focusing in any way. So then that part of the time when you're focusing, some of the part you're watching TV or listening to the radio, or you're reading a book. You're not sitting and thinking about yourself or whatever. There's very, very small, narrow bit of time when you're choosing what to think about and what to focus on and how to think. So that's why I thought, it is a big elephant, and you only bump it and steer it once in a while, but mostly it really is going on its own direction.
Yeah. So now, of course, that is how he intended it. He wanted to show you tiny little elephant rider who has this enormous power over this large elephant. So it's very visual, it's very relatable. But now that I've connected it with the elephant in the room, I've now expanded the mythological universe. It's like the Star Wars universe, and you have a new character here. The new character is the elephant in the room.
And we're in a different situation from mixing metaphors. When you have one metaphor and another, and you have to use them both, but they clash. We're in a situation where we have two metaphors that meld.
And that is the notion of synchronicity in mythology. When things happen together simultaneously that are apparently random, but they are not random in sense of meaning.
So if we also used elephants for our meat, and we used elephant tusks to build our huts out of, then we might be right on our way to having an elephant religion.
Something like that, yes, absolutely. Jordan Peterson talks. He has in his lecture series has an incredibly interesting topic where he talks about synchronicity and symphony, where he's talking about layering in stories. Where in some religious iconography, you can see in a hierarchy of different layers of things going on in the painting, right? And he says the reason they are this painter did this layering of things going on at this level, then at this level. This actually represents a content of the Bible, where you have one storyline going down here, and you have another storyline going further up, and they're layered. So you can be telling multiple stories at the same time, and they are like a symphony, like a chord. They're harmonizing. So when you hear one story and you're layering it on top of another story, it's like they start interacting and producing sweet music. That is not a rational way of communicating, but it is communication, and it's very close to art. Now notice how Ayn Rand said you have a metaphysical need for art, right? Now what she actually conceptualized in conceptual terms is precisely that there's a huge part of us that needs to see metaphorical language. We need to see maps of meaning. We need to see this thing that's not really conceptual in and of itself, but can convey conceptual meaning through visual or through perceptual means.
She didn't just say we need that. She said that that's like the real important part of, like, your sense of art is really, really important in her view. So
yeah,
the rational and stuff is how you choose your view of life and how you live and how you survive and how you make your life better. But then really, at the end of the day, it's art and beauty.
Yes. And the point is that if you look at the Bible and you're a Christian and you've been reading all these stories since you're a child, then you are actually reading a piece of art. Because you see one story, and then later you return to another story, and then all of a sudden you see, oh my goodness, they layer, they harmonize. I can see in this story something relating the other story. Like what I did, I actually did that now earlier when I talked about the duality between the Passion of the Christ and the fall of Lucifer, where Lucifer is an inversion story. They're the opposites of each other. That can be thought of as a form of harmony. And notice that it's very important to the early Christian writers to have as many prophecies fulfilled as possible in the New Testament. So there are 3 prophets coming in and visiting when he's born, and all sorts of like these prophecies that are fulfilled, and that the early writers wanted to fulfill, to connect it to the larger story. And they're using these concepts to paint these pieces of art that play around with your mind, not just so that you get a good sense of that was a nice experience, but you actually get a religious experience. It's like this is so salient that it fills your entire world. That's how important it is. That is what the religious experience is.
Yeah.
And Jordan Peterson connects it with awe. Now, here's the thing. In mythological terms, we can divide the world into 3 domains. You have order and chaos, and you have then in the middle, you have the hero that's fighting the dragon on the boundary between order and chaos. Those are the 3 mythological domains. Now, notice how order sort of too much order resembles misintegration, and chaos sort of resembles disintegration, and then all the good stuff goes on in the middle where you have the hero fighting the dragon.
Yeah.
Now the hero represents the fulfillment of free will, because if its world is too structured, you can't have free will. You're in a prison, and if it's too chaotic, you have no control over anything. Free will is exercised in that domain on the edge between order and chaos. And the hero is the mythological representation of the wielding of the power of free will, fighting the dragon.
Well, can't we just say that to the extent that religions are effective, they have to reflect reality?
Absolutely. if they are not reflecting something real, something true in the eternal sense of the word, then they're not going to be effective. And that's why you have natural selection that you need to have applied to religions. And you can't know until afterwards if you're struck on something that's a good story that will touch something eternal inside you.
So religions ultimately are poisonous. Ultimately.
Well, I hesitate to make such a. You're using here a metaphor for poison. The snake has poison, so I like how you
right.
I like how you're using religious language to describe that religion is ultimately poisonous.
So religion is metaphor. Yes. I mean, it's a group of emotional metaphors.
Yes.
So,
and not just any metaphor, but metaphors that touch something really deep inside you.
Emotional and effective.
Yes.
True. And metaphors.
Yes. And the thing is, we can, by using these metaphors, it doesn't exclude you from putting on top of that a layer of conceptual understanding. But I think that you can enhance the experience of conceptual abstract understanding by using strong metaphors. You get what I mean?
By using strong metaphors.
Like good metaphors.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. That's why I use the bus driver or whatever it is. Yeah. I always look for a good metaphor. Did you see the one about apples, oranges, and scientists?
I didn't see that.
So let me give you the metaphor in 2 sentences. Bananas come from a very structured, difficult. They're bananas, right? Scientists, same thing.
Okay. Yeah. Very nice.
So just tweak the banana culture a little bit, bananas are gone. Tweak modern Western culture too much, scientists are gone.
That's a very good analogy. Or metaphor, depending on how you view it.
Now, see, you corrected me on it earlier. I've tried to untangle the difference between analogies and metaphors, and I can only come up with an analogy for the metaphor and a metaphor for the analogy.
Probably that's the right answer, yes. It's not an answer, it's an analogy for the answer.
Metaphorically speaking, yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Very good, very good. So I'm still playing around with this. I see that there's a lot of... notice how I just made religion fun here in this conversation. I mean, I'm sure that you have a very bleak view of Christianity based on how you grew up. But we're talking about some cool stuff here. And in a Star Wars sense of it, right? This is fun.
Well, I'm only tempted in this direction for one iota of a reason, which is for the lower IQ populations and to try to get them to try to get truths into their hands and into their lives, even though they can't appreciate or understand or study abstract philosophy or philosophers or philosophical tracts or essays. They're never going to read any of this stuff. So this is a legitimate topic in my mind for that reason. So do I? Yeah. What do you say to that?
That's it. That's precisely it. I mean, suppose now if you have a completely secularized use of the word Satan or satanic, right? So that there's a large part of the population that uses it just like you use the bus driver. Like they understand it's a metaphor, but it's a very effective metaphor. It doesn't matter if there's a segment of the population who actually believes that there is a real Satan, a real person there who is influencing them. As long as they sort of get the gist of it.
Wait till they hear that altruism is satanic.
Ooh, that one is nice.
What are they going to do about that?
Well, the thing is that you can show that, like from a supernatural logic, like for God, so much did God love the world that he sacrificed his own son. So he gave up a smaller value, a lesser value for a greater value. Because he loved the world more than he loved his own son.
Yeah, I still don't get any of that. Sacrificing Jesus for, no,
I'm not saying that makes sense. Yeah. I'm just saying in this case, they appeal actually specifically to self-interest, egoism.
Whose egoism? Whose egoism?
God's.
It appeals to whose egoism? God's egoism?
Yeah, like it's an explanation of why Jesus died. God explains it in egoistic terms. That he loved the world more than he loved Jesus, and he chose the thing that he was valued more than the lesser one. So he's making, from his supernatural point of view, a selfish choice, right?
Right.
That's not altruistic.
Okay.
But you have to accept the Star Wars supernatural part.
Right.
Yeah. But within the Star Wars universe, that's a selfish statement, right?
Oh, yeah, fair enough.
And you can find all sorts of statements like that within Christianity, like love your neighbor as yourself. Well, it doesn't say that you shouldn't love yourself. You're actually starting with your own selfish love as the basis for how you should love others. Right? So that's self-interested, or it's rooted in a self-interested argument appeal to self-interest.
All right. So are we trying to let the Christians off the hook then?
No, I'm just agreeing with you that we can sell altruism as satanic.
Okay. We're definitely
so
what
would the devil try to fool a good Christian into doing if he could tempt him to destroy all of humanity, turn him to the darkest places? You would want him to embrace altruism, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but see, if you say that to them, they say, no, altruism is caring for others.
Yes, and I say,
I mean, it's a long uphill battle.
Yeah, and what I say, that's what Satan wants you to believe.
Then they'll say, you're satanic. You are Satan himself. You're sent to tempt me against altruism.
No, and I will say, come with these examples of appeal to self-interest in the Bible.
You should say, sit at my feet and let us go through the pages of the scriptures.
So I'm just playing around here, of course.
Right.
So I've not decided to go down a road where I'm going to employ religious language, but I just feel how incredibly relieving it is to be able to use a language that has been developed for 2,000 years or maybe longer to explain concepps to convey information, and people just immediately get what you're talking about. It just goes in the back door. It's like whispering in their ear. Zoom, they understand it.
Yeah,
it's just so incredibly powerful.
Yeah, when I have religious people talking about the left, satanic is the word, and when I'm talking to objectivists, I can only go to nihilistic. As like really destructive. I can't say satanic because then they say, so.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Nihilist doesn't actually capture the fall of Lucifer. Being tempted to believe that you don't need existence.
Right.
And then experiencing the fall from down into hell.
And satanic actually does capture what the left is today.
Yes, but nihilist doesn't. It's close, but it doesn't have the richness, flavor of, like a fine wine of satanic.
It's weak sauce.
Yeah.
Yet another metaphor.
Yeah. Now, so I'm actually considering writing a book called Satanic. This is like where I'm arguing that the greatest loss when people lost Christianity is not that we lost God, it's that we lost Satan, because now we're not able to express in words some really important stuff, right? And in fact, you can say that this is perhaps the most satanic thing of all, which is to lose the word Satan. It's to take away our ability to speak. We're no.
This is part of Satan's plan.
Yeah,
to take his name off the table.
Well, this is basically what Karl Marx did with when he took evolution off the table for Christians. He look, evolution means there's no God. You don't have to believe in this stuff. So then they say, okay, creationism is true and their evolution is bad. And then you can say, oh, thank goodness they're not going to be looking into evolution, because otherwise they would have so many good arguments for their beliefs, right? So now that's a classic example of satanic temptation or the lure of Satan, because you're making an argument, but the argument just leads you down a very dark path. Yeah. And so once you start to personify reason, it becomes a battle between good and evil, and you have characters in a story. So if you now go back to the story, to the Jordan Peterson debate at Ocon, notice how just listen to that now, and when he says he makes reference to something that sounds more like a narrative or a story, like a hero in a story. He says when.
I remember he said, so you have to do this, and you have to be this, and you have to be this, and he was describing Jesus and the whole Jesus narrative. Yeah, I remember what you're talking about.
And what he was saying when he said, that sounds like you're telling a story, it's like a hero in a story. What he was really saying is that all those fancy words you used, I was able to say like that with just a little story.
Yeah, well, amazingly, who was it? Was he talking to Salmieri or Garmong?
Yeah, Salmieri and Yarnbrook.
Yeah, and amazingly, Salmieri just gave a basic a small postcard summation of the virtues of Christianity, and Jordan Peterson by trying to describe objectivism, and Jordan Peterson he didn't have to do very much work at all to draw the parallels to Christianity. Hardly any work at all.
Salmieri didn't do a very good job in defending objectivism. There was a bunch of objectivists that I know that are really Ayn Rand Institute fans, and they were saying I wish Salmieri had been more prepared. And like Jeroen Broek, I can understand because he's not a philosopher; he's an economist. But Salmieri is supposed to be a philosopher, and he was just woefully unprepared, inadequately prepared for that discussion. Like, he didn't know what Jordan Peterson stood for. He didn't know his universe of mythology. Jeroen Broek had much better. He had actually watched hours and hours and hours of his lectures, fascinated by all this stuff, and therefore he actually understood that there's something going on here with this guy. I can't put my finger on it, but this is interesting. Why are people, 3,000 people paying $50 to see this guy talking about the Bible? That's interesting stuff. I want to know why. Salmieri is heard that Jordan Peterson is an important dude and didn't do his homework. basically. That was my impression. Now, I might be wrong about that, but that was the impression he gave off. That I wish I was on that stage. I would have had a wonderful conversation with Jordan Peterson, mostly agreeing with him about all this narrative stuff.
Yeah, I'm mostly want to ask him if he's sure he wants to bring it back, but then on the other hand, I'm not sure if we have an option, because there's this vast bit of the low IQ population we're just never going to be able to, they're never going to care about philosophy. So our only option is to build a culture. And are myths the best way? I mean, the Greeks didn't have religion, did they? They had myths. But of course, the Greeks are gone, aren't they?
Yep, they are. But
and Christianity is not gone.
Just like the phonic method might be best for low IQ people in order to learn to read, mythology might be best for low IQ people to learn morality.
Well, if so, we should try to have a more mythology like the Greeks, where it's a human mythology. You know, for the Greeks, everything was, all the thing the gods did were human things. They were, none of them were perfect. They had their flaws and so on. So if we have Christianity, let's say we go forward with Christianity as the religion of America, then it's going to have to be a Christianity that allows for evolution to be taught, and it's going to have to be a Christianity that allows for separation of church and state, and allows for differing sects and blah, 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 you know? I mean, it's going to be a very tame Christianity that rolls forward. I mean, everybody thought it was dying off, but you're saying, and Jordan Peterson's saying, that it's not going to die off.
It's not dying off. The meaning crisis. People are losing meaning because they don't connect with reality. And as long as we don't have this connection to reality, deep connection with reality, where we experience not only being objective in the sense of understanding the world, but having that feeling of salience, feeling of deep connection. It's like, now I'm touching something that my ancestors of 4 billion years ago touched. Like that feeling of, this is awe-inspiring. And this feeling of awe is actually a precursor to religious experience, awe.
Now, is religion emotional, metaphysical art?
Yes. I think that's a good summary. It's very good, actually, because it actually plays with your emotions using art, but in a so deep, fundamental way that it becomes metaphysical art.
Well, all art is metaphysical.
No, but I mean, it's art made out of metaphysics.
Yeah, yeah. The stuff it's made from is metaphysics.
Yeah.
Yes, interesting. Well, I hope the Objective Sphere watches this video. We should keep harping on these this is our first conversation on this particular topic.
Yeah.
And thanks to, who was the guy we started the conversation with, his question
about, am I afraid of Christianity?
Yeah.
Like what?
From the New Intellectual. Yeah. So there we go.
No.
Are you afraid of Christianity then?
Well, I would like to colonize Christianity.
Take it back, make Christianity great again?
Yes.
All right, excellent.
So I hope that people understand what that means after this long conversation. But if we can sort of take the language of Christianity and fill it with objectivism, that would be great. We can still have objectivism, ordinary objectivism, but then we will have a Christian version of objectivism too. How cool is that?
Infiltrate the religious. So what you're saying then is infiltrating the churches isn't going to be that hard, or at least Christianity.
No.
We can easily infiltrate Christianity.
I make a prediction. In just a few years, the most ardent supporters of evolution are going to be Christians. And they're going to be hammering on the heads of anyone who doesn't believe in evolution.
Because it's too obvious. It's true. It's too obvious. Only idiots deny it nowadays. You got to be an idiot.
No, but not only that, but there are idiots who deny it, and that's the left.
Mm. There are Mormons that are not on the left that deny it.
Okay, you have a certain group of fundamentalists, and then you have the grey Christians in the middle who sort of accept it, but they don't like it. But what's going to happen now is that not only are they going to accept it, they're not only going to like it, but they're going to integrate it as an integral part of their interpretation of Christianity, of religion.
Yeah. Once they have the evolution goggles on, they'll be able to see the Bible and religion through them.
And they're also going to look at, like, I see how, for instance, this is one of the reasons I follow this pastor, Paul Vanderklay, because he's starting to read the Bible through evolutionary lenses, goggles. And it's really fun to see how a Christian, like, he's a pastor, and he's a true believer and all that, but he's really reading the Bible through the lens that this is talking just to a very, very deep aspect of humanity that's very ancient. And it's very much fun. So I'm gonna close up with one of my ideas here. In the Bible, I talked about order and chaos, and in between you have this the edge of chaos where you have free will. That's the life stream. That's where we live. Now, in the Bible, you have something that represents this life stream, and that's the river. The river is the metaphor of this boundary between order and chaos. Now, and you have order and chaos too in there. Oppressive order, and you have chaos, which is the opposite. Now, chaos is represented again by water with the flood. That's chaos, excessive chaos. And what is excessive order? The desert. Wandering in the desert.
Right.
So it's all connected to water. Water is the life stream. Literally that edge between the two separate domains. Now, what's interesting about this particular way of viewing it, I'm like, this is just so easy to I can talk to any Christian, and they're just going to immediately understand what I'm talking about here. I don't have to explain this. They've never heard this before, but they just know everything immediately, right? And now, if I say to people at large, the meaning crisis that the West is going through, the nihilism, they're walking in the desert, right? So they're the wanderers.
So what we need is objectivism for religious people.
Yes.
And it's going to be, because should we just go through and translate one of the books of the New Testament into objectivism?
That would be nice, but I don't think that's unfortunately how it works. I think that when the way I've trying to figure this out is that I have to have an epiphany, or dare I say revelation.
How dare you?
So things just have to connect in my mind. So I sometimes I see these connections. It's just only like half a year ago I saw this connection between the story of Christ and Lucifer. That was an epiphany, right? Oh, and then I said, oh, that felt really like an epiphany, almost like in a religious experience. So now I know how that feels like. So it was a nice way of actually in real time experiencing what I was thinking about. Mm-hmm. That it's a duality, and when you have dualities, they have a special relationship to each other. And I was actually experiencing it. Wow, that felt really good. So I didn't put like religious significance into it, but I could feel why anyone would feel that.
Yeah.
And I can guarantee you, if I tell you the story of Lucifer as the duality of the story of Christ, every Christian they're immediately going to understand and say, "Oh, I've known that my entire life." That's what they're going to say. They've never heard it before, but they've known it their entire life. It feels like they're remembering something they've always known. This is the phrase that Jordan Peterson uses for mythopoetic truths. It feels like you're remembering something you've always known. That,
like a stitch in time saves nine and such like that, things that are true and ring true.
They ring true.
They ring true.
And interesting how, again, ringing, how can truth ring?
Right.
Again, it's this metaphor space, and it's the elephant in the room. Again, I did it. I did it. Like, it's right there, but we just don't see it because it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere, and we're using it just like it's like the water around a fish or the air we breathe. We don't really notice it, but it's there. And that's what I'm saying. This is an untapped potential for us to use to communicate ideas. Okay. Should we say that we've sort of reached the end of the line? I don't want to push this too long. We've been going on for over 2 hours with this talk that was supposed to be only 20 minutes.
Yeah. Is that how long we planned at the beginning? Yeah, I think we did plan that, didn't we? All right, let's draw a line here, and I've put over here, and the ladies and gentlemen can see objectivism for religious people. Should that be the topic of?
Yes, that should be the topic.
Should that be our title for this?
Yeah, it should. It should be, definitely.
Objectivism for religious people. Okay. All right. Thanks a lot, Onar.
All right. Very good.
We'll speak to you soon. Have a good one.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining me, ladies and gentlemen. If you like what I do, if you like my videos and my channel, please support me. Go to patreon.com, give me $5 or $10 a month, and I'll be able to make more videos and better and longer.